today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. What is Sky Nicholson's cryptic reaction to Amanda Serrano's move to vacate the WBC title on the premise that the WBC would not sanction her fights for 12 threes instead of 10 twos? Sky Nicholson, in her own words, said, as expected, "If you know, you know." To which fellow content creator Quentin D. Lilly said Sky would have certainly been an underdog in that fight, but Amanda using the 12 threes excuse as a reason not to fight you wasn't the right move. There seems to be a growing sentiment that this whole thing about 12 threes instead of 10 twos, it's not about equality, it's not about progressiveness in the sport of women's boxing. What it really is an effort to get out of the Nicholson fight. And Quentin, he's not alone. A Twitter user that goes by the name Cat Accor said she can't force other women to fight 3-minute rounds. I hope she's not intimidating her other mandatories with that, to which Book Sale Pats replied, she and her manager pretty much are, to which Jay responded, I was thinking the same. Not all women want the 3 minutes, and no, not all of them do. Where Sky Nicholson isn't a proponent of 12 3-minute rounds in women's boxing matches, Raven Chapman, she is. She said she'd be willing to fight Amanda under those circumstances, if that's what it takes. There's a growing sentiment in some circles that this is not about equality, and what this really is about is getting out of a Sky Nicholson fight.
And I don't agree with that, because I don't think the push for 12 threes is about Sky Nicholson. I think the push for 12 threes is about Katie Taylor.
You may have heard me say this before, that Amanda wasn't always such a big proponent of 12 threes instead of 10 twos, but ahead of the Katie Taylor fight, she made the recommendation at the kickoff press conference for the match that given the size and scale of the fight and the profile of the fight, they should fight for 12 threes instead of just 10 twos. But by that time, the fight had already been made. And in the fight, we saw that Amanda Serrano badly hurt Katie Taylor and came very close to stopping her, which gave rise to the sentiment that if there would have been more time left in the round, Katie might not have made it out. She might not have survived, and Amanda could have stopped her. I believe the push for 12 threes instead of 10 twos has more to do with Katie and less to do with Sky, because Sky...
Are you kidding me? 12 threes or 10 twos, Amanda beats her.
Stylistically, it's not a fight that favors Sky under any circumstances. If your plan of action is to stay on the outside on the balls of your feet, moving around, only throwing 1 and 2 punches at a time, you're gonna end up losing the rounds because you're getting bullied. You're getting outworked, and after a while...
the pace might catch up to her and she might get stopped, because skilled young fighter that she might be, she's nowhere near as experienced as a Katie Taylor or an Amanda Serrano for that matter, and she's nowhere near as big a puncher.
You're gonna keep Amanda off you only throwing 1 and 2 punches at a time that ain't got that much mustard on them? I don't think so. Stylistically, it's not a fight that I'd favor Sky to win in either 10 twos or 12 threes. So the notion that this is all about circumventing Sky Nicholson, at least for me, it's a tough sell. But on the predication that were what this is all about.
Just for argument's sake, let's argue that is what this is all about.
You have to remember that the rift here, it's not between Team Serrano and Team Nicholson. The rift is actually between Amanda and the WBC.
It's not like the two teams went into negotiations and this was a sticking point they could not get over, an obstacle they could not overcome.
But just for argument's sake, let's treat the situation as such, and let's say that the difference between getting Amanda in the ring and not getting Amanda in the ring is fighting for 12 threes instead of 10 twos. Sometimes in order to land a big fight, you have to make sacrifices. We see it all the time. Evander Holyfield had to make a sacrifice to get Mike Tyson in the ring. He had to take a back seat on the money on the predication that it would result in 2 fights and not just 1. He had to make a sacrifice. Floyd Mayweather had to make a sacrifice to get Oscar De La Hoya in the ring. He had to fight Oscar at Oscar's weight using Oscar's gloves. Canelo Alvarez had to make a sacrifice to get Floyd Mayweather in the ring.
But Sky Nicholson shouldn't have to make a sacrifice to get Amanda in the ring? Is that how this works? Last I checked, A-side calls the shots. A-side rules. Oscar was the A-side to Floyd. Floyd was the A-side to Canelo, and Amanda is the A-side to Sky, isn't she?
She's the more experienced, more accomplished fighter. She's the big name, not Sky, and she's the defending champion. So on the predication that Amanda were using this as a sticking point to stick it to Sky, what's the argument? That Sky shouldn't have to box for 12 threes?
Don't box for 12 threes. Don't do the fight. Let the WBC email you the belt and see what that does for your profile.
Now I reiterate, that's not the reality of the situation. The rift is actually between Amanda and the WBC, not Amanda and Sky. But if we're gonna treat the situation as such, that's another way you can look at it, that sometimes you gotta make sacrifices to get a big fight, and Amanda's the A-side here. A-side calls the shots.
Is that somehow unethical? These aren't weight stipulations. We're talking about a catch weight or a rehydration clause. We're talking about more time in a round, more time in a fight.
I understand that not every female fighter wants to box for 12 threes instead of 10 twos. You know, Michaela Mayer, she wanted the Jonas fight to be for 12 threes, but Jonas didn't budge. It's for 10 twos.
In that situation, Natasha Jonas is the A-side, but in this one, it's Amanda, and Amanda wants 12 threes.
So if things weren't the way they are, and the WBC were actually on board, Sky would have to bite the bullet. Then it becomes a question of, do you want it? How bad do you want it? Now, that's not the situation. The rift is really between Amanda and the World Boxing Council, not necessarily Amanda and Sky.
So let's get it straight.
Men's super lightweight and welterweight news. Reigning WBA super lightweight champion Rolly Romero on Ryan Garcia calling him out. I don't think he deserves it. He does not deserve to share a ring with me. Honestly, I don't even want to be at 140 anymore. I want to go to 147. There's lots of big names at 147 that I want, and I think you'll find that there's no bigger fight at welterweight than the fight with Ryan at junior welterweight, otherwise known as super lightweight. There's not a single fight up there that he can have that would generate more money and more interest than a fight with Ryan Garcia. It's peculiar because just the other day, it was Rolly Romero himself saying that if they were able to do that fight with Ryan would be the biggest, if not one of the biggest pay-per-views of the year. But now he's saying that Ryan doesn't deserve it, which is a strange thing to say coming from him, since they both got knocked out by the same guy, with the difference being that when Ryan got knocked out by Gervonta, it brought in $1 million, whereas when Rolly got knocked out by Gervonta, it just did north of 200,000.
Paltry numbers compared to Ryan's.
Why would Rolly want to leave 140 now when there's a big fight like that sitting right there? Well, maybe it's because he knows he doesn't have much leverage on Ryan, that in order to do the fight, in all likelihood, you would have to go to DAZN because the PBC at this time, perhaps they cannot afford to accommodate you. In my previous video, I talked about how you're starting to see PBC fighters that would normally box on PBC shows, they're popping up on much smaller, local shows like former champion Mark Magsayo or former unified champion Jarrett Hurd, that perhaps at this time, the PBC can't afford.
Maybe right now, they don't have the money to bring Romero versus Garcia to their side of things. He knows that, and he doesn't want to go to DAZN.
You say that he's got a belt, but what's having that belt worth when there's no money behind you? And you yourself, you don't even have Ryan's drawing power. You don't have the same size and scale audience that Ryan has. So while you might be the champion and you might have the belt, that doesn't mean you have all the leverage.
You don't. And what about outgrowing the weight? You know, Rolly Romero was always very big for 135. He may have already outgrown 140.
Now wants to go to 147, perhaps doesn't want to have to go to the DAZN platform. Maybe what he thought is he can have the fight with Ryan on his side of things, but what side is that? At this time, what side is Rolly Romero on? There's rumors that the PBC is going to jump into bed with Amazon Prime, and I think whatever resources that yields, they're going to use those resources for their high priority fighters, their high priority names, and Rolly is not a high priority.
Rolly is a joke.
Rolly Romero's boxing career is a joke. Him being a champion is a joke, and it's not a funny one. And if he decides that he would rather vacate his title and move up in weight to stay on his own side of things, what happens is the vacant title will likely go to the winner of Barroso versus Davies, at which point Ryan Garcia can challenge them, can challenge the winner of that fight in order to become WBA super lightweight champion. And Rolly, who knows who he'd fight up there? Broly said there's a lot of big names at 147 that he wants, but what big names is he referring to? What names at 147 right now are bigger than the name of Ryan Garcia? Who is he talking about? Mario Barrios? You think that fighting Mario Barrios is bigger than fighting Ryan Garcia? Keith Thurman is fighting Keith Thurman, a bigger fight than fighting Ryan Garcia. Now, don't confuse me giving you the lay of the land and going through all these different scenarios with me being a big proponent of this fight. I'm not a proponent of this fight. I think that both Rolly and Ryan are mediocre fighters that don't beat any of the top guys at 140 pounds. Put simply, I could do without this one, but I recognize the commercial viability of the fight. Moreover, I recognize that given Rolly's limited boxing ability, he doesn't stand much chance of beating the top guys at 140 any more than he does at 147, but at least losing to Ryan, and I think he would losing to Ryan would at least get him more money than all these other alternatives.
He would lose to them too, but he'd make less money in the process.
So what do you want to do? A pay-per-view with Mario Barrios? A pay-per-view with Keith Thurman? What do you think that's going to sell? Oftentimes in the sport of boxing, what you see is that the fighters don't know the ball from the bounce when it comes to the business of boxing and what is commercially viable, their own commercial value. If you ask them, they'll all tell you that they're the next big thing, the next big superstar, when in reality, Rolly doesn't move the needle, not by himself. Oh, he might get a couple of good sound bites on social media, which is free, but put him behind a paywall.
Put him on pay-per-view with Mario Barrios. Put him on pay-per-view with Keith Thurman, and what you're gonna see is a joke that isn't funny.
And I'm just giving it to you straight because it's the only way I know how to give it to you. And Rolly Romero, given his limitations as a boxer, I mean, he had a near-death experience with a senior citizen in Ishmael Barroso. So another loss is right around the corner. It's just the question of what loss gets you a bigger bag? What loss gets you more money? In men's heavyweight news, Deontay Wilder has declared that he plans to challenge the Tyson Fury versus Alexander Usyk winner for the undisputed crown. If you've got all the belts, you're gonna have to fight me. That's still my goal. Wipe out the entire division. Seems strange coming from him. Wilder, who spent the first 7 years of his career bypassing all the solid fighters at that time, and at this time, he hasn't faced the vast majority of solid fighters. Still campaigning at this weight, the one's still around, but that's what he says, and
I don't have a lot of stock in things Wilder says. Not that long ago, he was saying he was going to go in the world of mixed martial arts. He wanted to challenge Francis Ngannou, I believe it was, in the octagon, as counterintuitive as that sounds.
That's what he said. I didn't believe him about that. I don't believe him about this, mostly because he's not in position to challenge the winner of that fight. And the winner of that fight, whoever it is, whether it's Alexander Usyk or Tyson Fury, there's a two-way rematch clause in association with that match. That means if Fury wins,
Usyk can activate it.
and if Usyk wins, Fury can activate it. The better portion of next year for those two fighters may be spent boxing each other. And even beyond that, there are already mandatory challengers in the queue waiting for their opportunity. Ahead of Wilder, you have Filip Hrgovic by way of the IBF, Zhilei Zhang by way of the WBO. Manuel Char has resurfaced and he's WBA regular champion. Maybe somebody fights him in the coming year and maybe they become WBA mandatory challenger.
The WBC don't currently have one installed, but I saw a report that indicated what they might do is order a fight between Deontay and Anthony next year to crown their WBC mandatory challenger.
Deontay Wilder's gone back to singing the same old tune about how Eddie Hearn and Anthony are so afraid of him and he doesn't expect the fight to happen, this and that. But because he's not actually the mandatory challenger via any alphabet organization, yet he claims he means to fight the winner of Fury versus Usyk, it's hard to imagine how that happens without him fighting Anthony Joshua. And I've no reason to believe that the Joshua people are against the fight because everything we've heard from Eddie Hearn has been positive. That's the fight they're trying to make.
You say that you can't take Eddie Hearn at his word, but you can take Wilder at his. Wilder, who not but a few weeks ago was saying he's gonna do MMA now. He's gonna go fight in the octagon.
Wilder's penchant for theatricality always makes for interesting headlines that are easy to dispel because no matter how eye-catching what he says is, most of it doesn't actually happen.
Don't forget that he sat out most of this year, and don't forget that this guy's pushing 40. By the time the winner of that fight becomes available to him, how old's he gonna be? 41? 42?
Near as I can tell. If he takes care of business later on this month with Joseph Parker and Anthony Joshua takes care of business with Otto Wallin, the WBC is going to presumably order the fight between them. And that would be his path to the winner of Fury versus Usyk. But he's got to beat Joseph Parker, and he's got to beat Anthony Joshua after that, and we aren't there yet. So while it sounds good when he says that he wants to wipe out the entire division, the reality is this is the guy that hasn't boxed this entire calendar year. So if it's his goal to wipe out the entire division, he's off to a piss-poor start.
That's what Wilder does. He says a lot of things that sound good to some people who don't stop to think about how viable what he says is or isn't.
Does go over well with some folks. It fools them. America's obsession with how things sound and how things look as opposed to how things are.
What they are. Wilder's penchant for theatricality. It still has some people fooled, but not me.
It's what makes this situation so interesting, that in Joseph Parker, who he's going to be fighting later on this month, he'll be facing a fighter who's 7 years younger and has been a lot more active than he has in the last 12 months. Unbeknownst to most, Joseph Parker has already fought 3 times this year. This fight with Wilder is going to be his 4th fight in 2023, and he has about the same level of experience at this level as Deontay Wilder. He's been in there with Carlos Takam and Andy Ruiz, Anthony Joshua, Dillian White, Derek Chisora, Joe Joyce.
He's won some fights, he's lost some fights, but you could argue that Joseph Parker has fought more of this era's somebodies than Wilder has, and unlike Wilder, Joseph's not pushing 40, Joseph's 31, Wilder's 38, Joseph's not shaking off ring rust. Wilder is.
Deontay Wilder, who in the past has been reliant on timing the big right hand to get the other man out of there. And the other man, in this instance, is Joseph Parker, who for all his drawbacks has displayed a solid chin against some decent-sized punchers in the past. So before it becomes about challenging the winner of Fury versus Usyk, let's see Wilder get past that guy first.
Let's see what Wilder's timing is like, his power is like, after all these months of doing nothing but interviews.
Not saying that he won't make it past Joseph Parker, or that he can't, but it is an interesting situation, and these could all be rendered empty promises if he doesn't beat that guy, if Joseph upsets the apple cart for him.
Wilder's got to make sure that he doesn't.